Hello, I'm Christopher Albert, host of Junkie Jam Live, and we are shooting outside today because my Zoom app isn't working. But, much like my Zoom productions, I'm not wearing any pants. On today's special edition of Junkie Jam Live, I welcome my good friend, world-renowned, site-specific, multidisciplinary, and installation artist Abigail De Ville to tell us all about her latest site-specific installation right here in Madison Square Park, New York City. Not only is she a native New Yorker, but after receiving her MFA from Yale University, she went on to exhibit her work all across the United States and Europe. Her work, often rooted in the themes of the history of racist violence, marginalization, and cultural invisibility, has even been written up by the New York Times and the Washington Post. Her latest, site-specific sculpture entitled Light of Freedom also highlights the lost regional history of the first blacks of New York. While most of us contributed nothing but t-shirts and blank social media posts, the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement inspired her to create this masterpiece. And she's here to tell us all about her site-specific installation because I can't read any of this. This is a very special edition of Junkie Jam Live.
My name is Abigail Deville, and when I was born, my parents thought I was going to be a boy, but I think that was very common, back in the day, not knowing what you gonna get. So my name was Seth, and then I had no name for some days, and somebody gave my dad a name book, and that's where he got Abigail from. Really uninteresting story. But I could have been Seth. Hey, y'all. I make sculptures and site-specific installations mainly, but I also do painting, costume, and set design, and so I'm overall multidisciplinary artist. So I'm standing in front of my sculpture called Light of Freedom, and it was commissioned by Madison Square Park Conservancy, called me and asked me if I'd be interested in doing a project in the park, and I said, yes. I started thinking about, what potentially could respond to the moment that we were in, thinking about June 2020 and the racial reckoning that was going on with all of the protests around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And they gave me some history books on the history here of Madison Square Park, and it turned out that in 1876, from 1876 to 1882, the Statue of Liberty's hand and torch was here installed in the park, not very far from where I'm standing right now. And it was in an effort to fundraise for the Statue of Liberty. It was the only part that was fully completed, and it was sent ahead of the rest of the statue as a goodwill mission and fundraising opportunity, and to generate interest within the American public to put forth the money for the completion of the statue. The Statue of Liberty with the hand and torch, the image of that, this encapsulates everything, like centuries old struggle here in this nation, and thinking about the people who are always left at the margins and who are always struggling for equality and for equal rights under the law. The Declaration of Independence / the Constitution says that is afforded to each American citizen. So thinking about that, I was thinking about actually removing the hand, and the hand, thinking how the hand could potentially represent this idea of big government, but that it's actually the individuals that propel democracy. It's individuals that push forward these ideals that have never been realized from generation to generation, and thinking about the potential of that charge that's passed like a torch from subsequent generations, how it took 75 years of pushing and prodding and protest before the civil rights movement happened. It's just not something that just was like a flash in the pan of all of a sudden. It was consistent and constant activism and protest that led up to that moment, or even going back further and thinking about abolition, right? And thinking about how many decades of constant, opposition and the dissolution of slavery here in this nation, how long that took. So these are long, drawn-out struggles that happened over centuries, and thinking about the unfulfilled and the uncompleted work, which is, part of the promise of America. The symbolism that is layered within the statue or in the sculpture, there's a scaffolding that's on the outside that's painted gold, and the reason of that is thinking about the continual labor, or the way that labor is fetishized in this nation. And when it comes to ideas of immigration, or what potentially immigrants contribute to society, is, we always, or this nation always wants labor, the labor of the immigrant, but not actually the body of the immigrant, or how they shift and change and contribute to American society. And so thinking about also the unfulfilled and the continued work that needs to happen around these rusty ideas of democracy, right? So thinking about, okay, democracy is something that was taken from the Greeks, right? So it was already centuries old. It was an ancient idea in the first place, and how it was revisioned for, for America. So that's pretty much why the torch has this rusty patina on it. And then the bell on the inside, which I learned afterwards, because I was super hyped on having a bell in there and thinking about making a relationship to the Liberty Bell. But actually the bell was a symbol of the abolitionist struggle in the 19th century. And also it's an old school bell that came from a small town in Illinois, and thinking about also the problems of education in this country. Freedom is fought for and rings out, and voices, right? So making a connection between the silence of the bell and the silencing of voices. And then the mannequin arms that are inside the flame are blue, because blue is the hottest fire. And I was also thinking about the ways in which people came here were, historically water transport, right? And those are people who came here of their own volition, and those who came involuntarily through the transatlantic slave trade. The planks are there just, also to suggest this unfulfilled or unfinished work, and thinking about the casualness and the, almost obligation of all of us to participate within that.
Did you know my friend did this? You don't care, do you? I didn't vote for you.
Somewhere between the 1860s and 2021, I think the Statue of Liberty, its original intent has definitely gotten lost, and it's become this malleable symbol for political, use, and to, kind of divide people, right? It becomes this amorphous symbol that is pliable to whoever is wielding it. So it turned from being a statue that was supposed to be celebrating the end of slavery in the United States to a statue that then was framed as being a gift for the first centennial of the United States. So there was a kind of push and pull between the meaning of what it was from its very inception. Actually, the chains that the Statue of Liberty has underneath her foot, she was originally holding in her hand, instead of that book that says, July 4th, 1776, or whatever it is. she's also modeled on a Roman goddess named Libertas. She emancipated people, and so that is where the model came from. It was a statue in its inception, and its full meaning was about the end of slavery. In 1626, 11 Angolans were brought here. They're the first black people to be here in New York City, which was then New Amsterdam. And I think the city had only been founded for maybe about 3 years before their arrival. They were able to petition the Dutch government, or the West Dutch India Company. I always want to switch those two words around. Yes, for their freedom, which was granted to them, I think, maybe about 18 years after being here. It wasn't a full kind of freedom, and they ended up being farmers in areas that are now like where NYU is in the West Village, which were lands that were considered to be frontier lands between the European settlers and the Native Americans. So not only were they growing the food for the colony, because most of the people who were here were not interested in growing food at all, so they were feeding everybody and keeping everyone alive, but then they were also the physical barrier to the, potentially hostile conflicts with Native Americans. And so that was also a part of my thinking with this, was to honor them, right? Like the first black people who were here, who set up communities, who fed the colonialists here, and who had their lands taken away from them within a generation or two after the British took over New York City. It became illegal for black people to own land or to be property owners. And so then that's where the more kind of rigid apartheid slave situation started happening here, which is embedded in the bedrock of New York City. And I think those some of those iniquities are still with us today. The key reasons for me wanting to make this sculpture was to be able to respond to the moment and honor the Black Lives Matter movement, which has been ongoing since 2013. And thinking about that as a 21st century update to the continual liberation struggles that have been going on here for 400 years. Even I think in all of the conversations that have been going around in terms of the historical reckoning and dealing with public monuments and public space, and all the Confederate statues that were removed this summer, and in a way for me to think of a temporary monument as a public sculpture for the Black Lives Matter movement. And so then I think that also perfectly ties in with the original intentions of Bartoli in having it as a sculpture that could address or celebrate the abolition of slavery here in the United States.
Hi! What the hell are you still doing here? Shouldn't you be in Florida? Here. Put on a fucking mask. Asshole.
I think the critical reception or the public reception to the piece has been really wonderful. People have had lots of conversations about the meaning of public sculptures, and then also rethinking what do we actually understand about the Statue of Liberty as it exists as an American icon. Works are so layered, and they mean different things at different times to different people. And I think I've heard from the parks staff here that there have been many groups of people that have gathered around the sculpture and talked about it and discussing what it actually means, or potentially what the symbol of the Statue of Liberty means. And so I think it's generated a lot of good conversation, and I really couldn't ask for anything more than that. So what's next for Light of Freedom is it will be traveling. It's on the road, taking a tour of America. It's going to Bentonville, Arkansas, and it'll be on view at the Momentary, and then it will be traveling to the Hirshhorn, which is right across the street from the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see what other stories the torch will unearth, in its travels and the sticky little residue that it'll accumulate from traveling from place to place. Upcoming, I have an exhibition. I'm in a group exhibition at Pioneer Works that will open April 2nd. And that's about it.
Stay tuned. Up next, I quiz Miss DeVille about her knowledge of Lady Liberty. And then I quiz Lady Liberty about her knowledge of Miss DeVille. Spoiler alert, Miss DeVille wins. 'Cause you know, Lady Liberty can't speak.
Hi. Thank you. That's me. This should be good because I don't know how much I actually know, but you know, I'm right. Yeah. Let's do this. Liberty enlightening the world. Yeah, I knew that one. You know, whatever that plated material is before it turned green, before it oxidized and turned green. It flew out of my head. We all know what it is. It's copper. Copper, hi. Does she have on her what? You know, I don't know, but I'm gonna take a guess and say 13. Okay. The continents. I don't know. That's it? Yearning to be breathe free? Is that it? Yeah. I'm Lazarus. They say his mother, but that might not be true. They think it's maybe a model that modeled for him when he spent time here in New York City at some point, maybe in the 1860s. So nobody knows. Yeah, July 4th, 1776. She has on some sandals and she's stepping on a shackle. That dog don't care. Okay. You got me slipping and sliding on here. Hey, get off of there.
Now, you could have just settled for painting with a brush on your little canvas. How did you end up doing this intricate work of sculpture? I mean, it's such a labor of love, obviously. Any art, obviously, is.
I feel like I do paint, but just with objects. And
yeah.
I think supersize was always my natural scale, right? Like it things just feel right when it's a room size installation or intervention. Rather, it's very hard for me to make something that's 8.5 by 11, or something that's small.
Is it just too restricting of a space?
Yeah, and I need dirt. I need that to be like the base layer of something, right? Like I need a fact or a history or something used, something that has some sort of residue to it, and then be in conversation and riff off of that. And like it's daunting to think about like a blank page or a blank surface, and especially like a compressed space.
Your work, for the most part, can be described, as you say, site-specific installations that give physical presence to unspoken histories and forgotten past. Extrapolate on that a little bit. I mean, you go into a space, at this point, you already have this goal to tell stories of the past using found objects. For those of us who aren't as cultured, what are site-specific installations?
So it's when somebody makes something within a landscape, or like a city alleyway somewhere that's not an institutional or gallery space.
Yeah.
And then they make it there and they leave it there, and it's usually has a kind of it has a time-based element built into it in terms of like that it's already inherently has death encapsulated within it, right? Because it's not protected from the elements and things like that.
Right,
but it's
right.
something that lives outside of the potential, maybe, of being, buyable or marketable or something like that. So, and when it first really got, hot in the streets, when it got really popular, I don't think it actually feels like it could be analogous to like 1970s like graffiti practices in New York City, right? Like it's not unlike that. It's very close to that.
It's like claiming your territory as an artist,
making something in unsanctioned.
Does that make your work more accessible to more people when you do at least outside, site installation? Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of people are not going to pay like $25 to go to a museum to see something, right? But they may walk down the street and see something.
Yeah, but you got into this place where, okay, I have a voice, you have a vision, and you want to tell other people's stories who the world or society has forgotten about. How did that it's such a lofty objective, right? And it's become your signature work. What made you decide to go there? What was that aha moment? I can do this for others who can't tell their stories anymore, or who just don't have a platform to tell their stories right now.
I mean, I think it probably started when I was an undergraduate at FIT. There was a moment where I was just kind of hit a wall, and I was making a lot of things, but without any like real ideas, fueling them, just being excited to make stuff. And then I developed the first kind of research project was me just delving into the history of hip hop and seeing, that it was like a true artistic movement that had a visual and performing and writing component, right? Like a real straight up art movement, and thinking about what kind of intense struggle
and a social message, right, behind it.
Yeah. So thinking about just the kind of freedom of expression, or people competing with each other, or people making each other better, but then all of the societal factors that led up to that explosive moment.
Yeah.
So that was really the first research project, and then thinking through that, and then larger, right? Like trying to make these connections with small spaces of like my grandmother's project apartment, or like thinking about our place within the universe. Somehow I got there. I'm not sure when that really happened. Maybe like around 2009.
Oh, well, it doesn't.
I started thinking about the universe.
We don't have to set a date to it, but you know it.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess as an artist, you get to
around
this.
there. I started thinking about the stars.
You studied the classics.
About our place within that.
You studied the classics. You do what you gotta do, and then like, what the hell am I doing this for? Comes about.
Yeah, and you know what? Now that actually makes me, think about my relationship to my grandmother, and I lived with her for 5 years in the Bronx.
I know. Well, you lived with your grandmother, who you called an amateur hoarder. Well, you know what? We're going to talk about grandma. I want to quickly ask you about this because, there are artists, I enjoy the art. And I don't like to pretend like I know either. I'm just like, ooh, what's this? Let me see what I can get out of it. I love when it stirs some kind of emotion, but a lot of the times it's just like, oh, here's a painting. What's next? Here's a sculpture. But now there are artists out there, who repurpose materials. I've seen cute things done with hula hoops, gum wrappers. What sets your work apart from others who source salvaged materials?
Well, I guess we're all in conversation with each other, and I think the way that I think about it is a kind of hidden and also encapsulating archive, right? Like an alternative history that is an alternative history display, right? So if like the installation that you saw at the ICA in Los Angeles, right? Like I was in LA for a month, collected a whole bunch of materials, and then tried to make something that I thought that was responsive to that the institution's particular proximity to
the area, right? It was close to Skid Row.
To Skid Row. Yeah, to Skid Row, to the Greyhound bus station. The kinds of development and gentrification that's happening all over Los Angeles, right? And then thinking about the four corners of that room encapsulating the kinds of development or history that's happening, and thinking about displacement, but then these actual items serving as, like as a reminder and a witness and evidence of that kind of displacement.